So I'm going to start off this way. Linguists, people who study language, have theorized that language developed as song. Before we had pen and paper, before we had clay tablets, before we even had an alphabet to write down our grocery list so we didn't forget it, we had a language that was completely spoken out loud. If humans wanted to remember anything, stories, how to hunt a bison, how to nap an arrowhead, names, we would sing it. Language has a rhythm and a cadence. Language has other little figurative things that it does with sound, like alliteration. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Language has rhyme. So as we discuss poetry today, I want us to remember that language is first an auditory medium. Therefore, I won't be using any slides because I want us to rely on our ears to make sense. That sense that it's kind of a secondary sense. Most of us, especially in our culture, we're such a visual. We have screens in front of us all the time. Our primary sense, especially, not only as humans, but especially our culture has trained us this way, that we would be visual first. So I want to kind of turn on the ears for this, and we're going to be trying to hear things that maybe we wouldn't be able to hear if we were reading them. I had a professor once that told me that no meaning in a poem should go without sound, basically. If you're going to be reading poems, then you should probably be saying them out loud, because primarily they were meant to be heard. You do have a printed version of the poem that we'll be discussing today in the zine that Taylor was talking about. Thanks, by the way. Is Mike Gowdy here, by the way? Thank you very much for doing this. It's great. So you do have a printed version of it. I promise after this lesson you won't need the printed version of it because you will have it memorized. That's goal number 1 today. You are going to memorize and be able to recite a poem in the next 45 minutes. Goal number 2 is to read a poem closely and follow as many of the rabbit trails as we can in order to see what a master poet is capable of doing with only a few words. And we'll be looking for allusions, which are references to other works of art, puns or plays on words. Dads know all about those. And imagery, as well as exploring how to incorporate the senses. Finally, goal number 3 is developing our own sense for seeing creation with gratitude and honor to God so that we can remember what He has done and tell other people about it. So, 3 goals. 1, you're going to memorize and recite a poem. 2, we're going to read it very closely. And 3, you're going to develop your own sense so that you can see what God is doing here with gratitude and honor. So, here's the poem. It's called Dust of Snow. It's by Robert Frost. Most people in America know who Robert Frost is or have some idea, like two roads diverged in a yellow wood, or stopping by woods on a snowy evening. Most people have that in their head, even if you don't know the whole thing. This is Dust of Snow. It's very short, 8 lines. It's about 37 syllables. The way a crow shook down on me the dust of snow from a hemlock tree has given my heart a change of mood and saved some part of a day I had rued. Pretty simple. Should be pretty easy to memorize, right? 37 syllables, you got it. And we're going to do this by, first of all, I'm going to be breaking you guys up into 8 groups. So I hope you're not too comfortable where you're at. And I know it's 9:17 in the morning, and you're like, oh, gosh, I don't want to do this. I have to talk to people. I just sat down with my egg bites. So you don't have to move much. I'm going to see if I can break it up how you're already sitting. But 8 groups. Each group is going to get 1 line. Pretty simple, right? So the first one, let's say Mike through the Jones girls. You 5 are going to be in one group, okay? And your line is going to be the way a crow. Pretty simple, right? You already have it memorized. Okay. And then Taylor and Mikey, and tell me your name again. Anna. All right. Anna, would you mind moving possibly? Sorry. Or they can move. I don't care. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. There's two. The way a crow shook down on me. Easy, right? Okay. Then this group, you're going to be 7 of you. Y'all's line is the dust of snow. Pretty easy. Taylor and Audrey. Let's see here. We got that group. That's great. That's 3, 4. Y'all can be group 4. Dust of snow from a hemlock tree. Okay. All right. And then you 4, Stephanie, is that right? Okay. Would y'all, however y'all want to do it, and you don't have to get up and move yet, but you can in a little bit whenever we start discussing this stuff. Y'all will be, has given my heart. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So everybody from Aaron back to you, back there. Tell me your name. Yes. Darcy. Okay. So Aaron back to Darcy. Y'all will be a group. Where were we? Were y'all at Hemlock Tree? No. Change of heart? No. Yes? Okay. Okay. It's given my heart a change of mood. And saved some part. Yep, that's you guys. And then this group is of a day I had rued. Okay? Okay. Pretty simple, right? All right. Now we're going to go through this kind of like the wave at a baseball game. Line 1. Right as you take a bite, yes. The way a crow. Yes. Did I give you the wrong line? Okay. I saved. Yeah, it is my fault. I'm sorry. Okay, go back to Colton's group. A change of mood and save some part. Okay, then I'm going to throw myself in here and put one of these lines on me. So y'all, it's okay. Go back to you, Colton. A change of mood. There we go. I messed it up already, but that's okay. But you can see pretty simply, you guys have almost memorized a poem, okay? Now, you couldn't do it. If I put you on the spot and said, you, tell me the poem, you wouldn't be able to do it probably yet. And nobody likes to be able to put on the spot anyway. But you're starting to hear the poem, right? Even if you can't see it, although you have it in front of you, you are starting to hear the poem. And that's honestly, if you start to turn that sense back on, it becomes much easier to memorize things. Okay. Now, we've got the poem in our head a little bit, right? Now we're going to switch gears. We're going to go to Romans 1. If you want to, you can use the Pew Bible, or I'll read it to you. And I will be drawing these things together. I'm not just like Jesus juking you and say, here's a poem. Now let's talk about Jesus. This is in Romans 1. I think it's verse 20-ish. I didn't put the verse number down. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. But they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Okay, so this is what a lot of theologians call Paul's natural theology, which is basically you can look at creation and just simply by looking at the things that have been made, you have some idea that there is a God that made all of that. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't some spark of chemistry of non-matter turning into matter. But there was someone with a mind to design all of it. He's also warning against idolatry, because what humans have always done from the beginning of time is to look at the things that have been made and then try to make gods out of them, right? If you go to Egypt, you can find, or basically any ancient culture is going to have some sort of sun god, because that is the thing that you see constantly. It sees everything. It's always up. It gives us light to see other things. But you can understand why it would be easy for a culture to begin to make a god out of a part of creation, right? But what Paul is saying, no, the problem is people exchanged the immortal God for images resembling these things that have been made. So that's part of what he's doing, is warning against idolatry. But what I really want to focus on is not just the warning, but more on how we worship the true God. Stay away from the false ones, but how can we use this gift as a way to worship the true God? And that should, if we're doing that, keep us away from idolatry. As Christians, our work is to perceive God in creation. What has God given us to perceive nature? What gifts has he given us to perceive nature? So I'm going to go back to part of that section in Romans. For although they knew God, they did not honor him or give thanks to him. Because they chose not to give thanks to God or honor him as God, they immediately fell into idol worship. They began to make other things the things that they would worship. So, 1, God gave us 5 senses, yes. And by that, we perceive all of his creation. Right? So, let's go through the 5 senses. I know you know them, but it's kind of helpful. And then you can begin to think in a way that you could look outside and say, okay, what has God created? And the first sense that we usually go to is our sight, right? So, think of some things that God has created and what immediately springs to mind when you start thinking about it in terms of sight. You don't have to tell me, just in your own head. Okay? Now let's move on to sound, our ears. What things can you perceive in nature? Just the first thing that comes into your head. You don't have to make a big list of it, but then smell, then taste, maybe something pleasant, then touch. And touch goes a long way. So you've got fingertips that are very, very sensitive, but you also have lots of other ways to touch. You can feel pressure, you can feel heat, you can feel cold. Okay. Now, those 5 senses are passively always on, right? A lot of times if you're in an elevator, you wish you could turn your nose off, but you can't, right? You are going to smell things. I think we all have things that we have seen that we wish we could unsee, or things we have heard and wish we could unhear. But now, because now they are, however the senses work, ingrained in our memory. But on the other side of that, I think we also have lots of things that we have seen that we wish we could remember better. I remember going to the Grand Canyon and watching the sunset there, and it's so big that it's kind of impossible to conceive. Like there's no reference. Like you can see the other side of it, but there's no reference for saying in a human scale how far that is. Okay, so since all of these senses are always on and they are passively consuming everything that comes into our view, our brain starts to sort things out and give it orders of importance. But we also have control of them. We can discipline our senses to perceive things in certain kinds of ways. And what are the 2 ways that Paul recommends here in Romans 1? There's 2 disciplines as Christians that we need to have. Gratitude towards God and honoring God. So, if we begin to think about how to discipline our senses, what we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we touch, and what we taste, not just as passive things that are antennas that are always on, but in ways that we can direct those senses, in ways that we can honor God and give thanks to him. Okay, so keep that in mind. I will tell you this too. Those two things, those two disciplines are not my default, and they're probably not your default. The first thing that happened when my alarm went off at 5:30 this morning was not springing out of bed with gratitude towards God and honoring him as God, right? It was more like I need coffee, my body hurts, and I need to pee. Sorry. I just assume that's a universal experience for everybody. Okay. So if they're not my defaults, okay, that means I need to train them to be, right? That means somewhere in that morning as I'm coming into consciousness, I need to turn that on and say, this is what I'm going to do. I am going to give thanks to God, and I am going to honor God for the thing that he has woken me up to, all of his creation. Okay. Keep that in mind. It's not my default, probably not your default, and I'm definitely sure it was not Robert Frost's default either. So we're going to go back to the poem real quick. The way a crow shook down on me, the dust of snow from a hemlock tree has given my heart a change of mood and saved some part of a day I had rued. Okay, try to individually place yourself in the scene that Robert Frost has given us. And just a little background, Robert Frost lived in New Hampshire, so his winter looks like one of those Hallmark movies, like a winter is supposed to look, not like a panhandle winter where it's 70 degrees and blowing 90 miles an hour. So when he describes a winter scene, that's kind of what you need to have in mind. Now try to imagine as thoroughly as possible. Let's go through that poem, through the list of senses, and see if we can begin to imagine the poem in a sensory way. By the way, if you guys want to write poetry, that's a really good place to start. Picking out senses, describing a scene in a sensory way. So, the way a crow, imagine this with different senses. Can you see it? Can you see a crow at least? Can you hear the crow? Shook down on me. All right, so now we've got some sort of spatial relationship between the narrator of the poem and the crow. The dust of snow. All right, now we've got a new sense. We've got sight and sound so far, but the dust of snow, we suddenly understand there is a feeling, a sense of touch here. Okay? The dust of snow from a hemlock tree. Okay, hemlock tree is an evergreen, which is not deciduous. What's the other word? they have needles. Yeah, there we go, coniferous. Thank you. So that gives you a scent, I think. Can give you a scent pretty quickly. All right. Now, that's the first half. That's the first stanza, first 4 lines. Very quickly, in 4 lines, each about 4 syllables. One of them, I think, has 5 syllables. He's given us a very clear image of walking through woods on a winter day, and there's a crow, and there's snow. You're very much there. If you're willing to let your imagination get into that place, you were standing there with him. Okay? All right. The next half of the poem is a little bit of a commentary on what happened to him in the first half of the poem. And we'll get to that in a second. So, here's a little bit of a side note. Psalm 19. Some of you know this. Speaking of disciplining our senses and perceiving God behind his creation. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. Their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them he has set a tent for the sun, which comes out like a bridegroom leaving his chamber, and like a strong man runs its course with joy. Its rising is from the end of the heavens, and its circuit to the end of them, and there is nothing hidden from its heat. There's a beautiful passage about looking at creation and seeing that it is constantly speaking to you. Day to day pours forth speech, right? Now, that's only the first half of that psalm. The second half of that psalm lists off a bunch of things. When you're talking about disciplining your senses, it said, instead of looking at God and trying to make a God of nature, the second half of that psalm says this: the law of God is perfect. The testimony of the Lord, the precepts of the Lord, the commandment of the Lord, the fear of the Lord, and the rules of the Lord. So the psalmist takes a look at nature and says, it should be relatively easy to see God behind creation. But we have to discipline our senses and look at creation according to the rules and the commandments of the Lord, right? It actually says, in the psalm, it says the fear of the Lord. I think that may be an easy way to jump over to what Paul said and says, honor God as God, right? I know this. I read a lot of poetry. Some of it's good. A lot of it is bad. And it's okay to think some of this poetry is awful, okay? It's good to develop a taste and a sense of what is good and bad. A lot of poetry I've read is what we call nature poetry, and where the poet can't walk across the backyard without stumbling into some sort of epiphany. Sometimes it's good. A lot of times it ends up changing the immortal image of God for the mortal image of man. Like the most important thing in this poem is actually the poet's feelings about the thing, rather than seeing God behind all of it. That's something I would like us to avoid. But I think Paul and the psalmist both would like us to avoid, and especially God. Because what we're here really to do is to honor him. Okay. Now, now we're going to go back to Dust of Snow. Okay? I know I keep throwing you back and forth. We're back in the poem again. Dust of Snow. This time we're going to read it really closely. The first stage when you're reading a poem is to read it literally. Okay, what happens in the poem? And this one, it's going to feel silly, actually, for me to ask you to summarize a 37-syllable poem. Your summary is going to be longer than the poem is itself, right? But I think this one is simple enough that you guys can get it pretty literally. However, poetry, sometimes a poem is difficult to understand literally. Not this one, but as I send you out into the world and start reading poetry, sometimes it's actually really difficult to understand a poem, just what's going on here. Not what it means, what the symbolism is, or any of that stuff, just literally what's going on in it. And I will tell you this, if you're being a charitable reader, somebody who's willing to give it its best shake, poetry often is used to awaken our perception of a thing that has become mundane. So, every one of us has this experience of hopefully, falling in love. Well, it's been said so many times. How do we say it in a novel way? How do we say it specifically? Because the way I fell in love is not the way that you fell in love, right? And being able to say it in a way that awakens that sense for somebody else, that it's a possibility. I promise, I've watched a lot of romantic comedies with my wife. I like them too. And a lot of them, especially lately, have been very cynical. Like the love that's portrayed in them is not a love that I want to fall into. So when I go and read a good poem about falling in love, it reminds me that there are good ways to do it, ones that last a long time, that aren't based on frivolous things and arguments that don't matter. So that's one of the reasons that we want to read good poetry. But falling in love, because that story is told so often, can become mundane, boring. But if you find a good poem, sometimes it's a little difficult to understand on a literal level, but the way they use the language awakens us it kind of cracks open that mundane, calloused view that we have and just tells it to us in a new way. So sometimes, even if it's difficult, it's worth getting into. The poem we're looking at today, though, I think is pretty simple. Okay. Like I said, 37 syllables. This poem is very easy. I'll just summarize it for you because you could probably do it. Actually, I'm not going to. I'm going to have y'all do it. I'm going to pick somebody at random. John Michael Jones. You don't have to summarize the whole thing. Tell me what happens in the first 4 lines of the poem. Good. Good. Most of us wouldn't think like walking through snow and then getting dumped snow on your head is fun. So, good. Pretty simple, right? Now, I will say he did get ahead of us because in the first 4 lines of the poem, it doesn't say anything about his mood. It just says that he's under a tree. That's basically all we get is he's under a tree with a crow and there's snow, right? Now, in the second stanza, we get the fact that he is in a bad mood. Okay, so let's go through the images real quick. And this jumps beyond the literal reading of the poem. We all understand it very quickly, and it's one of the great things about reading Robert Frost is most of his poems are, on a literal level, very easy to understand. Now, he's also doing a lot of other stuff, which is really, really great. It's kind of this simple magic trick that he pulls where the language is really easy. And then suddenly, if you start to like pull out the threads of it, you realize, oh, he's doing a whole lot. Okay, because this could fit in a greeting card, and you could say, well, great, he's got a better mood. I hope this is something that I can give to a friend. Hope your day's better, right? So let's look at the images. Let's look at the crow. Why did he choose a crow? Because if I was in a bad mood, I would think a bluebird or a songbird, something like that would lift my spirits. Why did he choose a crow? And let's see here. Actually, yeah, for time's sake, we'll do it like this. Can anybody tell me what is usually associated with a crow? And you can shout it out or raise your hand, whatever you want to do. Yes. Gloom and doom, good. Does anybody know what the collective noun for crows is? A murder, good. Yeah, everybody knows that one. A murder, good. Death, doom and gloom, right? Good. That is you can get pretty far afield when you start saying this thing symbolizes this thing, but culturally, I think we all have a pretty good understanding of what a crow generally represents, okay? Doom and gloom. Now, I will also say, since Robert Frost was a poet, and he very much had in mind a lot of other things, a lot of other poems. In fact, one of the things Robert Frost is known for saying is, a poem is best read in the light of all other poems, which means you're supposed to read all the other poetry to make sense of this one. Is that possible? No. But I think the goal is circulation. You need to be reading other poems. You need to be reading scripture. You need to be reading the old stories that have been passed down to us. So, I will tell you this. In Greek mythology, which Robert Frost was very aware of, there was a myth about Apollo. Does anybody know who the god Apollo, what he was the god of? The sun, okay, good. By him we can see a lot of things. Okay, good. There's also a lot of other things he's associated with. One of them is art. Also prophecy. He would deliver messages to men from the other gods, usually sometimes in the form of a dream, sometimes in a song. He's often associated with carrying a lyre or a lute. And art being this form that you can take these abstract messages from the divine and then deliver to somebody else in the form of a song or a painting, right? So Apollo was the god not only of the sun because you can see by it, but also the god of art and music and prophecy. He also employed crows. Why? Because of doom and gloom? He doesn't seem like the doom and gloom god, does he? That would be Hades. He's the doom and gloom god, right? He employed crows because they were his spies. He knew everything that was going on in the lives of men because crows were everywhere. And it's funny because if you go watch a movie now and you see crows, a lot of times you'll see crows. One, there is either a dead body somewhere close by, or they are spies or messengers. Was it Harry Potter that had crows? I don't know. There was somebody. Lord of the Rings, that's right. Yes, perfect. They were the spies, right? They knew what was going on. They were gossips. They would bring back messages. But it's also, there's this idea that in that crow, there is some sort of divine communication going on, right? Just because of the myth. Do you have to know that to understand this poem? No. But does it make the poem richer when you do? I think so. Something's going on in Robert Frost's heart here. Okay, then next, snow. What do we immediately know about the season? It is winter. Good. What happens in winter? It snows, yes. Things die. Good. Oh, man, are we developing a theme? Yeah. Things die in winter, right? Okay. So, just like every good English teacher, I turn a perfectly happy poem into something about death. I didn't do it. Robert Frost did. Is there a theme developing? Yes. We've got crows that are gloom and doom, but also some sort of divine communication. We've got snow. It's winter. Just to further prove the theme, how does he describe the snow? Is it with downy flake, as he uses in other poems? How does he describe it? What's the word? Dust. Okay, dust. Now, you can go a lot of ways with dust. When we think of dust here, it just reminds us of, like, spring. But he describes the dust of snow. Right, we've already got the murder bird, right? We've got winter where everything is dead. And now it's dust of snow. Do you think there's a theme developing? What other things do we describe dust with? The Bible uses specifically ashes to ashes, and dust to dust. Good. Pretty simple, right? Okay. Now the hemlock tree. This is my favorite part. Hemlock tree. One, as we discussed earlier, it is a coniferous tree. Thank you, Mikey. What do we know about coniferous trees? They're evergreen, right? In the middle of winter, are they still alive? They're still bright green, right? Okay. They're also huge. They can get to be 200 feet tall. We don't have trees like that here, but they do in New Hampshire. Okay. Hemlock tree. Now, here's another thing. Because Robert Frost was a poet, and he had all of the other poems in mind and all of the other literature that he'd ever read in mind when he was writing this poem, a hemlock tree. He is describing a literal tree, but the word hemlock has an echo in literature. Has anybody ever heard the word hemlock? It's not actually a tree. It's a poison. Good. Is that what you were going to say? Okay. And it's famously a poison that was used to kill Socrates by suicide. It was an honorable suicide. He had been put on trial and convicted for corrupting the youth, and one of his corruptions of the youth was that they would have a monotheistic culture rather than a pagan or like polytheistic culture. And while he's in jail waiting his execution, his friends come to visit, and they try to convince him, just recant your beliefs, turn away from this principle, and live with us, your friends. And he says, no, I can't do that. This is a principle that I must hold to. And at the end of that part of the story, he takes the hemlock that the guards have given him, which is a poison, and drinks it and dies. So, there is, by the way, one of the things, not only the monotheistic thing, but in that last conversation that he has with his friends, he has a long discussion about the immortality of the soul, which is an interesting thing for ancient Greeks. because Socrates was a little bit different than a lot of the Greeks. One, like I said earlier, he believed that there was one God, even though he couldn't name him as this God that we worship. He also believed that there was an immortality of the soul, which wasn't necessarily a Greek belief. There were shades. You might end up in Hades if you were. They didn't really have the notion of heaven and hell like we do anyway. So this idea that Robert Frost brings up the word hemlock, now it's a different plant than the one he's talking about with Socrates, but we all use the same word, hemlock. And the reason it's named the hemlock tree is because when you crush the pine needles, it smells like the poison. So Robert Frost is aware of this. And when he's thinking about this, can we probably think when he's walking through the forest and he has some part of his day that has been ruined, right? It's the day that he rued. What is he probably thinking about? You can probably get an idea. Okay? And that's not just like we all need to be thinking about death. We need to remember, like Psalm 90 says, we need to remind us to count our days, to number our days, right? We are going to die, and we need to be worshiping God in the meantime. There's lots of ways to think about it. There can be positive ways to think about death in that sense. I am short-lived, but I will be with you in eternity. But there are bad and despairing ways to think about it too. Okay, and the last word. I'm coming up on time, but I think we can get through this. The day I had rued. It's not a phrase we use very often, right? And it's not, so if you're only listening to it, it's not that he's saying that this day is so rude, right? It is rue, like rue the day. Has anybody ever heard that phrase? Usually it comes to us, you will rue the day you were born. My revenge will be so swift or whatever. It comes from Christopher Marlowe, who was the contemporary of Shakespeare. So we get that idea. Rue means despair, sorrow, okay, deep despair and sorrow. It's kind of a high language, so it's only used really by us in this really like a sense like when we really feel despair, we would say, I rue. And not only just rue, it's usually in that phrase, I rue the day I was born. This is how deeply I despair. I wish I wasn't born, like George Bailey, right? Wonderful Life. Or there are some other, I know I can think of two specific instances in the Bible where somebody actually says that. They don't say rue the day, but they say, I wish I wasn't born. Does anybody remember where they are? Job, that's the obvious one, right? Job very much says, I wish I wasn't born. And we all know why he says that. I think he has a legitimate reason to say it, right? Jeremiah also says it because Jeremiah was called to be a prophet, and everything he said, everybody ignored or persecuted him for, and then ruin still came. It didn't matter what he said, right? So he also said, I wish I hadn't been born, right? So when Robert Frost uses the word rue the day, he thinks of that phrase from Christopher Marlowe, and he says, rue the day I was born. And then we, as Christians, we can also, and Frost probably could too, because I'm sure he read the King James. He would also think Job. I feel a little bit like Job right now. Or maybe even Jeremiah, where I was supposed to tell people things and they didn't listen to me. And as a poet, Robert Frost probably felt that a lot. I'm telling you guys great things, and none of you are listening to me. I want to listen to the radio, because they didn't have TV back then. Even more so, I'm going to play on that word rue for just a little bit. Is it okay, Colton? Okay. Rue, R-U-E. It is also an herb. Has anybody ever cooked with rue? Nobody does anymore because it's very bitter. It tastes like medicine. But it is like a Mediterranean. I think in some Greek dishes you can still find it. Think of like bitter, more bitter than rosemary, which rosemary is really delicious if it's cooked in with other things. But if you ever you can imagine rosemary is a little bitter. Okay? So it's a bitter herb, like I said. Have you ever bitten into just bitter herbs? Can you get the taste out of your mouth? Right. I mean, you have to follow it with something salty or sweet to get that taste out of your mouth, right? But if you just let that linger, now imagine the feeling that Robert Frost, or the narrator of this poem, is actually feeling as he's walking through the day. You know he's already despairing, and it's one that you can't get out of your mouth. It's a flavor you can't get out of your mouth. Now, is he punning on the word rue? I think so. Not only does he have that phrase from Christopher Marlowe, rue the day, but he also has, there is a bitter herb called rue. And if you're Robert Frost, you might also know that he might be quoting Hamlet, Shakespeare. There's a scene in Shakespeare where Ophelia, Hamlet's girlfriend, ex-girlfriend at this point, because he murdered her father. I love Hamlet. It's so good. Actually, the stage direction says, enter Ophelia, insane. She's lost it. She is in deep despair. Her father is dead. The man she loved accidentally killed him, and she is completely lost. Her brother's out of town. He's just come back in, and he's going to die too. But as she's going around and she's carrying these different herbs, and she begins to quote these things. She says, there's rosemary for remembrance, which in different cultures, you would use rosemary to remember things. It's a very strong scent. You can, it's a way to remember things is by their scent, right? Pray you, love, remember. And there are pansies. Those are for thoughts. And then she imagines she's got all these flowers in her hand as she's going around talking to people, and it sounds insane, right? There's fennel for you and columbines. There's rue for you, and here's some for me. We may call it herb of grace on Sundays, which was another name for it. Oh, you must wear your rue with a difference. Okay. So, I promise, Robert Frost has this in mind. Ophelia then leaves this scene and either drowns herself or is accidentally drowned, right? She is talking about there's rue for you, there's rue for me, there's despair. That's a word, there's deep sorrow for you, and there's deep sorrow for me. But then she also kind of counteracts it a little bit and says, we call it sometimes on Sunday an herb of grace, which is really fascinating because she is despairing unto death at this point, but she's reminded by those disciplines that we have on Sunday that there's this grace that keeps coming in even through the bitterness, right? And this is something that Robert Frost is aware of when he says, of a day I had rued. There's rue for you and there's rue for me. But maybe there's some grace. And where does the grace come in this poem? The snow, right? The crow, this divine messenger of the gods, shaking down snow, dust. Dust, from dust we are, and to dust we shall return. Reminding us there is grace. Okay. So, a little biography on Frost, and then I'll wrap up with just a little piece from Acts. If you know anything about Frost, besides the fact that he was a world-famous poet, reading at inaugurations of presidents, you would understand why he may despair. His wife died of cancer after they'd been married for 40 years. They had 6 children. One died of cholera as a child. One committed suicide. One was committed to an insane asylum. One died as an adult while giving birth. And one died a few weeks after she was born. Do you think that Frost might indulge himself in ruining the day he was born? Do you think he may have the bitter herb in his teeth and he can't get rid of that taste? Right? I think that he did. But if we are paying attention to the creation that God has given us and doing it with this attitude of grace and honor to God, then that bitter herb turns to an herb of grace. In Acts 17, whether Frost was able to acknowledge this or not, I don't know. Probably not. Maybe. His simple observation of the scene bears witness that God was speaking to him and was saving him from his despair. So, Paul, standing in the midst, this is from Acts 17, Paul, the Apostle Paul, is in Athens, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, this temple where all these philosophers would gather and talk about these other gods, the ones that he called, that he exchanged the immortal image of God for the mortal image of man. He said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, the Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man. Nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind, whether the ancient Greeks, those ones that would make gods out of sun. And he made from one nation every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us, for in him we live and move." This is where he starts quoting poets. "In him we live and move and have our being." And Paul says to them, "Even as some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. Being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and the imagination of man. But he's the one behind all of it. And if we tune our senses and discipline our senses with gratitude and honor to God, then maybe we can begin to witness what he's doing in creation and tell other people about it in a beautiful art form." All right. Thank you.